Hi everyone, my name is Elizabeth Stevens and I'm the instructor for your course. I have a doctorate in communication and I teach strictly online. So welcome to Communication for Organizational Effectiveness, or COM 3500 as I call it. I'm excited that you enrolled in this course. During our time together, we'll be looking at the intersection of interpersonal and organizational communication. Well, you may be thinking, duh, of course there is interpersonal communication within an organization. But in this class, we're going to focus on the specifics, the basics of how our interpersonal communication affects our success and relationships within an organization, and conversely, how organizational parameters affect our interpersonal communications with coworkers, peers, supervisors, etc. So in each unit's lecture, I will assume that you've read the chapters, so please do so. The book is super easy to read. So my lectures won't be a restatement of the book. What I'm going to do is pull out some concepts and then supplement the readings. So information from my lectures may also be on the midterm and final exams. So be sure and take notes or look at the transcript from the closed captions. In this unit's lecture, I will cover some communication basics as a starting point, then connect it all together to different variables that affect ourselves and our relationships in organizations. So let's start with the process of communication. So we have a sender and a receiver, and it's really a two-way communication process between the sender and the receiver. But the sender encodes a message. In other words, he or she thinks about the message that they're going to send and converts it into a language and symbols that are understandable to the receiver. In turn, the receiver decodes the message and makes sense of or translates what the sender has said. And then you have the give and take between the two, the process of understanding, arriving at understanding. So the channel affects the way in which communication is sent. So it can be face-to-face, it can be asynchronous, which is one-way online communication. It could be through text. There's so many varieties of channels. So just think of the different ways that you send communication, and that is a channel. Another issue that affects communication is noise. Now this can be internal noise because maybe you're busy or you're thinking about your to-do list or what's coming up next, or maybe you're just hungry and you're having a hard time paying attention. It can also be external noise, so that's actual noise in your environment that affects how you communicate and how you decode or encode. So the process of communication, of course, forms the foundation for everything that we're going to talk about in this course. Now let's connect it with organizational communication, which is the exchange of oral, written, and nonverbal messages among people who work together to accomplish common tasks and goals at work. This definition is from O'Hare, Friedrich, and Dixon. Think about the relationships you have at work. For examples, coworkers you're friends with. I know that I made some of my best friendships when I was working in the public sector with people I worked with. Maybe you have a supervisor or manager who you're friends with, or maybe you have or have had a romantic relationship with someone at work. And then, of course, there are customer and client relationships. So we have a variety of relationships in our organizations that affect how we communicate and who we communicate with. Think about, what are the effects of these relationships for you and for the organization? Because they do have an impact. So let's do a quick review of some of the concepts in Chapter 1. Self-awareness. What is self-awareness and why do we need to think about it? Well, as you can see, it's a capacity for introspection and the ability to reconcile yourself as someone separate from your environment. So you're thinking about yourself very deeply. You're trying to know yourself. So you want to understand yourself in relation to others and developing relationships. Self-awareness also helps us set meaningful life and career goals. And it also increases our ability to contribute to organizations, friendships, employers, community, and family. And I found this great talk, TED Talk, How to Increase Your Self-Awareness. It's really interesting. I think it's about 14 minutes. So if you have time, listen to what she has to say in this video, because it strongly connects to what we read in the book, but it takes it a step further and amplifies some of the concepts. A lack of self-awareness. Now, maybe you've known somebody who has a very strong lack of self-awareness. They just don't realize how they come across in situations at work or in their relationships. So a lack of self-awareness can lead to poor decisions, unrealistic ideas about your personal competence. So have you ever known someone who thought they were super competent at something, but everyone around them knew they weren't? That's a definite lack of self-awareness. Incompetence and possibly career derailment. So a lack of self-awareness can really hinder us in our personal relationships and, of course, at work. So just consider, how can you increase your self-awareness? Now let's look at the big 5 model personality traits. It's also called OCEAN as an acronym that stands for openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Neuroticism is not in a negative way. So this video that I've included here is about 4 or 5 minutes. So the person in the video does a really quick overview of the model, and I recommend that you watch it because there's also a question about this model on the Unit 1 discussion board. So I want you to think about this. Because by thinking about these personality traits, we can look at how we interact with others at work. All right, so that's just those are some of the concepts that I wanted to pull out of Chapter 1. Let's go ahead and look at Chapter 2, which is about self-disclosure and trust. So let's look at self-disclosure, but let's compare it to self-description because I think sometimes people get confused about this. So self-description is when you tell others non-threatening information, or such as your age, your address, your college major, where you work. It's just kind of basic demographic information about you. Self-disclosure is different because you're revealing very significant personal information about yourself, and it may exceed the expectations of the moment. So self-disclosure, let's look at that. An essential characteristic of self-disclosure is trust. Trust can impact personal and organizational relationships, and trust always involves an element of risk. So, trust involves keeping promises and commitments that you make, not revealing confidences told to you in private, because that leads to gossip. Developing personal competence, looking deeply into yourself, becoming self-aware, and ensuring that your actions are consistent with your words. Do you know someone that you trust? Do you trust easily, or does it take a lot for you to trust someone? So effective self-disclosure, disclosing personal information about yourself, involves transparency, authenticity, reciprocity, and some amount of risk. So when you're transparent, you speak openly. You don't really have any hidden agendas. You're just helping to build trust and encourage a similar tone and openness from another person. Authenticity, you're ensuring that how you present yourself in one place is consistent with how you present yourself in another place. Reciprocity, so that involves matching the level of self-disclosure offered by people with who you become acquainted. So, think back to your teenage years, maybe, or your elementary years, where you had a friend and you told each other your biggest secret. That involved an amount, a matching level of reciprocity. Your friend told you a secret, you told your friend a secret back. If not, that's not reciprocal. But when you self-disclose, you accept that some amount of risk and some amount of trust is involved. Now, the benefits of self-disclosure. At work, it can increase team productivity. It creates a trusting environment. It helps you maneuver better at a global work environment. It strengthens your online communication, such as email, and it improves organizational communication. Have you ever known someone who was what we call a low self-monitor? They display their feelings, attitudes, and behavior in every situation. It's like they cannot rein themselves in enough. Compare that to a high self-monitor who constantly adapt their true self to conform to a situation or expectations. It's not that they're being false, it's just that they're monitoring how they're coming across to other people. Those are high self-monitors. This can impact your professional and personal relationships on how you self-monitor. And it can also affect your job behavior and your interactions with others. So thinking about self-disclosure, let's look at the social penetration theory model. This is a foundational psychology, social psychology, and communication theory. And this is one of my favorite theories because I've always found it to be fairly accurate. And if you've ever seen the movie Shrek, Shrek refers to, let's see, what does he say? Life is like an onion, or relationships are like onions. That's a metaphor about social penetration theory. So it's a very foundational interpersonal theory. Altman and Taylor originated this theory in 1973, and they proposed that relationship development depends on relationship bonding, or what they call social penetration. Individuals move from a superficial to a deeper level the more we get to know someone, and that we're open to knowing someone, and they're open to knowing us. Emotional intimacy develops over time. So, assumptions of this theory are that relationships progress from non-intimate to intimate. Relational development is usually systematic and predictable. So it follows a path, as you can see in the diagram. It goes from superficial to deep. Relational development also includes dissolution. So think about someone you've had an intense relationship with, whether it's a friendship or romantic relationship that dissolved. It's very painful, I know, but this model also includes that. Self-disclosure, as we just discussed, is at the core of relational development. And this theory is also grounded in social exchange theory because it considers rewards and costs in a relationship. The greater the reward, the more you may stay in the relationship. The bigger the costs, then you may not stay in the relationship. So on the outside of this diagram, you have orientation, and that occurs at the public level where we just reveal a little bit about ourselves. We act in socially expected ways, like we smile, chat, ask how you are. It's very superficial and light at this stage. The next stage, as you can see, if I can find my cursor, is the intimate or exploratory stage. This is also called the exploratory affective stage. And affective, in theory speak, means emotion. So at this stage, we go a little deeper and we start to reveal parts of our private lives to others. So think about a casual acquaintance or a friendly neighbor and the conversation you have. And that's what's happening in this stage. The next stage is the personal and affective stage. And this stage becomes spontaneous and comfortable. You know, you can hang out with this person. Think about close friends and intimate partners. Relationships become unique in this stage, and you may share a language with people in this stage, such as inside jokes, keywords. And then the last one is at the core. It is the stable exchange stage. In this stage, you have complete openness and spontaneity between partners. You're very intimate and highly synchronized. So you can finish each other's sentences. You know what the other person's thinking. This is a very stable relationship. So how does this apply to work relationships? Well, think about the ones you have at work. Again, between coworkers, supervisors, managers. You may have even developed good relationships using computer-mediated communication with people you only talk to online. The Johari window, as outlined in your book, is also about self-disclosure, and it moves from non-intimate to intimate, like social penetration theory. But because, again, this is a core theory in communication, I wanted to review it with you. Okay, those are the concepts I wanted to pull out for Chapter 2. So let's move on to Chapter 3. Establishing goals consistent with your values and ethics. By looking at the difference between values and ethics. So personal values, these are deeply held ideas that we have about right and wrong in the world. They are principles or standards of behavior. For example, maybe your family valued hard work. So that's a value for you. They valued being honest, not cheating, not stealing. These are very deeply held. So our values are influenced by our family background, our culture, our religion, influential people in our lives. And they vary according from individual to individual. So we can't assume that everyone has the same values as we do, because they don't. Everybody has different cultural sets or lenses that they look at the world through. Ethics is a set of moral principles, and it especially relates to a specific group, career field, or form of conduct. Ethics are a professional set of values, if you want to look at it that way. Different professions have different ethics, as do organizations. And your ethics vary according to the organization. So why are ethics important? Well, organizations are increasingly demanding that their employees set goals based on high ethical and moral standards. So ethical guidelines provide organizations with a set of internal rules to ensure good decisions are made. With strong ethical guidelines in an organization, this can result in positive work culture, lower costs for the organization, a high reputation or a good reputation for an organization, and equal consideration for the rights and responsibilities of all stakeholders. What are some of the ways that organizational ethics are reflected where you work? Maybe you have checks and balances in certain job positions. Maybe your employer monitors your internet usage or blocks certain websites and expects employees to follow that. Or a mission statement. Look at the mission statement in your organization and think about how that reflects ethics. So some guidelines for ethical thinking. Avoid actions that will hurt others. Think about who will be affected by an action and how they will be affected. And remember that an action that is legal can still be unethical. Obey the moral guidelines that you set for yourself and respect others' customs and ideas, but diligently follow your own ethics. So ethical thinking it requires some self-awareness about your values, but it also involves consideration of others and how your behavior or your actions affect others. So some organizational tools that can help in ethical decision making is a code of ethics. Does your organization have a written statement of values and guidelines on how to treat employees and customers? Is there a tangible description of what your organization stands for, what it wants to achieve, and the means for achieving its goal? That could be its mission statement. Maybe your organization has an ethics test, a series of questions that helps employees in making well-considered judgments about a situation before making a decision. So there's some ethics tests listed below in components: test of common sense, light of day approach, etc. All right, so we come to our last chapter in Unit 1, which is about self-management. And in this chapter, we'll look at emotional intelligence, time management, and stress. So let's begin by looking at components of emotional intelligence. It's also called EQ, your emotional, like IQ. There have been several books written about emotional intelligence, and I did read one. It's been a long time ago, and I can't recommend a specific one, but the video that I've included here by Daniel Goleman, he is one of the foundational originators of the concept of emotional intelligence. So any book by him would be a good investment of time. So be sure and watch this short video. It's about 5 minutes long because he goes over some foundational concepts of emotional intelligence. Benefits of emotional intelligence, or EQ. So emotional intelligence is just a willingness to tune in to how other people are feeling. It's like measuring a temperature in a room and considering how other people feel as you make decisions or work in a team. It creates win-win relationships and outcomes for you and others. It helps develop healthy social relationships and emotional support structures. So think about at work. Maybe you have a mentor that really helps you with decision making, or someone that you can bounce ideas off of. That person probably has a high amount of emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence also helps us use emotions as tools for interpersonal effectiveness in social environments. This goes back to self-monitoring. How am I presenting myself? How am I interacting with other people? And it also helps us work cross-culturally because we become more culturally sensitive. And part of this is developing as an effective and mature communicator. So let's switch gears and look at time management. I know you've probably heard about and tried to practice time management most of your life, like me, but it's worth talking about because I bet the majority of this class works full-time, may have family commitments, on top of taking college courses. Where do you find the time for yourself, right? We all struggle with managing our time. For example, I am a master procrastinator. I love to procrastinate. So that doesn't help me with my time management, right? But time management is simply behaviors that we use to achieve our effective use of time while going through our task list. So it does help us prioritize and accomplish more goals. It gives us balance between work and personal life. It can increase productivity and reduce stress levels. I'm all about reducing stress. And it can provide more time for activities that you consider important. How does the way we manage our time affect us at work and at home? Well, we might run into what's called a time famine, where we feel that there's too much to do and not enough time to do it. And I don't know about you guys, but I feel that way a lot. It's very prevalent in a work environment that has increased employee responsibility. And if you're working full time, then you go home and you start what's called your second shift, and you feel like you don't have enough time at home to get things done. I've always liked the Stephen Covey book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's an old book. I know it's been updated a few times, but it's really my go-to when I get tired of trying to find my extra hours in the day that aren't there. But I recommend thinking or looking at the way that you manage your time, especially important. Like I said, we're all busy people with busy lives. So I just stuck that in there at the end as a reminder. Management is managing stress. And I like this video. It's about 15 minutes, but the speaker talks about things or issues that are relevant to all of us. And then she talks about how to flip stress and make it work for you. So, take the time and watch it. It's a good video. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. And I just want to conclude by saying that this unit's lecture forms the foundation for other topics we will study through the course. It's always helpful to move back and forth in your book to seek understanding about the topics. And of course, anytime you don't understand something clearly, then always reach out to me. I answer my phone until 5 o'clock. You can text me or email me. All right, take care, and I will see you online.